Imagine you are walking through a bustling shopping mall, weaving your way past window displays. You spot a pair of shoes in a shop window, and your eyes are drawn not just to their style, but to the price tag, $200. You hesitate, $200 for shoes? You move on, eventually finding a similar pair across the corridor, this time marked at $110. Suddenly, that price seems not just reasonable, but like a bargain. What just happened? You have encountered the invisible hand of anchoring, a psychological phenomenon quietly shaping your judgment. Anchoring is a cognitive bias that ties our decisions to the first piece of information we encounter, often a number, but not always. The concept first emerged in the field of psychophysics, where scientists studied how people judge things like light, sound, or weight, often finding that an initial stimulus can skew later perceptions. Later, this effect was formally described and explored in behavioral economics by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, two pioneering psychologists. They discovered that our minds are not as objectively rational as we like to believe. Instead, we give the very first data point we see. An anchor, far more weight than we should, even if it is entirely irrelevant. You can observe anchoring in everyday situations, often without realizing it. Take, for example, the way shops display their products. When you are shopping for jewelry, you might first notice an elegant necklace with a price of $500. Even if you do not buy it, its price lingers in your mind. Next, you look at a pair of earrings for $150. On its own, that might seem expensive, but compared to the necklace, it appears affordable. Now, a t-shirt at $45 feels like a steal. The initial prices become your measuring stick, subtly shifting your entire sense of what is reasonable or expensive. In this way, anchoring does not just nudge us, it hijacks our sense of value. Anchoring's influence is not limited to retail. In restaurants, the menu might feature an extravagant high-priced dish, a $30 hot dog, for example. Most diners will not order it, but its presence is not accidental. That expensive item serves as an anchor, making the $15 salad or the $18 burger seem much more affordable by comparison. Even though you would never have considered spending $30 on a hot dog, the mere presence of that number changes how you feel about every other option. This tendency to latch onto the first number, even when it is unrelated or arbitrary, is widespread. Studies in behavioral economics have repeatedly shown that anchors can be almost anything. In negotiations, for instance, the first offer often sets the tone for the entire discussion. If a seller starts with a high price, even if it is unrealistic, the buyer's counteroffer tends to be higher than it would have been otherwise. This is not necessarily a rational process. Research suggests we have difficulty adjusting away from the initial figure, even when we know it should not matter. Consider an experiment involving MBA students, where participants were asked to estimate the value of a used car. Some students were first exposed to a high anchor price, while others saw a lower anchor. Despite having access to the same detailed information about the car, those who saw the higher price produced higher estimates. Their judgments were swayed not by the car's actual condition, but by the first number they encountered. Anchoring, it seems, is stubbornly persistent, even among well-educated analytical thinkers. But anchoring is not always about numbers. Sometimes, it is a first impression or a descriptive label that shapes our choices. Researchers have shown that both numeric and non-numeric anchors can direct our thinking. For example, when people are asked to make physical judgments, such as estimating the length or weight of an object, the first suggestion, even if it is wildly inaccurate, can bias their answers. If someone suggests that a stick might be 2 meters long, you are more likely to guess in that vicinity, regardless of whether it makes sense. The anchoring effect is so powerful that it can override our own knowledge and experience. In retail, this is often exploited through tactics like marking up prices before offering discounts. When you see an item labeled was $100, now $60, the original price becomes the anchor. The $60 is not just a number. It is a deal, a victory, a smart purchase, all because your mind cannot help but compare it to the higher anchor. Retailers know this and use it to their advantage, crafting sales and promotions that guide your decisions in subtle ways. Anchoring does not just shape what you buy or how you negotiate, it colors your judgments in personal situations too. Think about the last time you tried to estimate how long a task would take or how much something might weigh. The first estimate, whether it came from you or someone else, probably influenced your own guess. This effect is so ingrained in human psychology that it can be found across cultures and contexts, from pricing antiques at a flea market to estimating the distance on a road trip. The persistence of anchoring raises an intriguing question: why do our minds work this way? While the research context here does not supply a full explanation, what is clear is that anchoring is a deeply rooted cognitive bias. We tend to give excessive weight to the first information we encounter, even when we know, rationally, that it should not matter so much. Whether it is the price of a car, the cost of a meal, or the value of a piece of jewelry, the first figure we see sets the tone for everything that follows. Everyday life offers countless examples. When you receive a salary offer for a new job, that figure becomes the anchor for all future negotiations, often making it hard to imagine a dramatically different number. In medicine, initial statistics or prognoses can frame how patients and doctors interpret symptoms or treatment options. Even in casual conversations, first impressions often stick, shaping the way we perceive others long after that initial meeting. What is remarkable and perhaps a little unsettling is how little control we have over the anchoring effect. The bias operates swiftly and often unconsciously, influencing our choices before we even realize what is happening. Even when we are aware of anchoring, simply knowing about it does not always free us from its grip. The first number, the first impression, the first suggestion, it all plants a seed that shapes what comes next. Of course, there are limits to what we know about anchoring. The research context here does not detail every possible situation where the effect might occur, nor does it explain precisely how to avoid it. But the evidence is clear. Anchoring is a universal feature of human judgment, shaping our decisions in ways both large and small. So, the next time you find yourself marveling at a bargain, hesitating over a first offer, or second-guessing your own estimates, remember the hidden force at work. The power of the first number is real, and its influence reaches further than most of us realize. Anchoring is not just a quirk of the mind. It is a fundamental part of how we think, shop, negotiate, and judge the world around us. Recognizing this effect is the first step toward understanding, and perhaps, just occasionally, resisting, the subtle ways our judgments are hijacked by the very first anchor we encounter. Imagine being handed a slip of paper with a random number scribbled on it, perhaps the result of spinning a brightly colored roulette wheel. You are told the number is arbitrary, meaningless, just a prop. Moments later, someone asks you to estimate the percentage of United Nations countries that are in Africa. Logically, the number on the paper should have no bearing on your guess. Yet, as Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky famously demonstrated, it does. Those who happened to spin a high number tended to give higher estimates. Those who spun a low number guessed lower. This phenomenon, where an initial value, no matter how irrelevant, pulls subsequent judgments in its direction, is what psychologists call the anchoring effect. The science behind this reveals a fascinating interplay between our brain's shortcuts and its vulnerabilities. At the core of anchoring lies the concept of heuristics, mental strategies our brains use to simplify complex problems. The anchoring and adjustment heuristic, as described by Tversky and Kahneman in their 1974 paper, works like this. When faced with uncertainty, we latch on to any available number or value, using it as a starting point, and then make adjustments from there. The trouble is, these adjustments are rarely sufficient. We become stuck, often unconsciously, closer to the anchor than we ought to be. This is not just a quirk of the mind, it is a systematic bias, one that challenges the classic notion that people are rational decision makers. Even when we know the anchor is arbitrary, our brains cannot quite shake its gravitational pull. Consider another classic experiment from the early days of anchoring research. Participants were presented with a seemingly simple math problem. What is the product of the numbers 1 through 8? But there was a twist. Half the group saw the sequence as 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 times 8, while the other half saw it reversed, 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 1. Both sequences yield the same result, but the way the problem was presented mattered. Those who started with the higher numbers produced higher estimates than those who started with the smaller ones. The first numbers in the sequence served as unconscious anchors, shaping their sense of what the answer could be. As Kahneman later reflected, anchors are not only powerful, they are often invisible, influencing us even when we believe we are immune. Why are we so susceptible? Part of the answer lies within the architecture of the brain. Neuroscientific studies have begun to map out the regions involved in anchoring and adjustment. The prefrontal cortex, particularly the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, appears to play a central role in exercising cognitive control over these processes. When this region is disrupted, either through injury or experimental techniques like transcranial direct current stimulation, people become even more vulnerable to anchoring effects. It is as if the brain's internal editor, the part responsible for double-checking our snap judgments, has lost its red pen. Other research points to the medial prefrontal cortex as a hub for evaluating and adjusting from anchors. These findings suggest that anchoring is not just a fleeting trick of attention, but is embedded in the neural circuits that govern higher-order thinking. What happens in the mind as we encounter an anchor? One influential model proposes a two-step process. First, we generate an initial estimate based on the anchor, almost automatically. Second, we attempt to adjust away from it, drawing on whatever additional information we have. The adjustment phase, however, is effortful and prone to error. Most people tend to stop adjusting too soon, leaving their final estimate biased toward the anchor. This tendency is so robust that it persists even when people are warned about the risk of anchoring or incentivized to be accurate. The strength of the anchoring effect has been confirmed in numerous experiments across cultures and contexts. Researchers have found that even when participants are explicitly told to ignore an initial number, their estimates still drift in its direction. This persistence hints at the unconscious nature of the bias. Kahneman himself described anchors as unconscious influences, noting that people are often unaware of just how much their judgments have been swayed. It is tempting to think that intelligence or education might grant immunity, but the evidence suggests otherwise. While there are individual differences, some people are more reflective or more skeptical of initial values. No one is entirely free from the effect. Studies suggest that individuals with greater cognitive reflection, the ability to question one's own intuitive responses, show somewhat less susceptibility to anchoring. Higher intelligence is also linked to marginally weaker effects, but even the most analytical minds are not immune. The bias is so deeply rooted that it shows up across a spectrum of ages and backgrounds, quietly shaping the judgments of both novices and experts. Several competing explanations have been proposed to explain exactly why anchoring occurs. Some researchers argue that it is a simple case of insufficient adjustment from an initial value, while others suggest that anchors activate related knowledge and memory, making certain answers feel more plausible. Still others propose that anchors serve as reference points, subtly changing the way we frame the estimation task itself. The literature reflects a lively debate, with different models attempting to capture the nuances of the effect. What remains clear is that anchoring is a multifaceted phenomenon, with both cognitive and neural roots. The neuroscience of anchoring continues to evolve. Recent studies using brain imaging techniques have highlighted the importance of the prefrontal cortex in managing the interplay between automatic anchoring and deliberate adjustment. When people are asked to resist an anchor, regions involved in executive control and monitoring light up, suggesting an ongoing internal tug-of-war. In one line of research, scientists found that stimulating the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex could actually reduce susceptibility to anchoring, suggesting that our brains could be trained to resist, at least to some extent. Other studies link the medial prefrontal cortex to the evaluation of anchors, reinforcing the idea that adjustment is more than a matter of willpower. It is a process with a distinct biological footprint. Despite these advances, many questions remain. Researchers continue to debate whether anchoring is best understood as a failure of adjustment, a priming of related concepts, or a blend of both. Some have suggested that the context of the anchor, how it is introduced, how relevant it feels, may play a key role in determining its influence. Others are investigating whether certain personality traits, such as openness to experience or need for cognition, might buffer against a bias. What is clear is that the anchoring effect is not a simple glitch, but a window into the way our minds work, efficient, adaptive, and sometimes surprisingly vulnerable. The anchoring effect has transformed our understanding of human judgment, revealing the hidden levers that steer our thinking. It is a testament to the brain's remarkable ability to find shortcuts, but also a reminder of the costs. Even as neuroscience uncovers the circuits involved and psychologists refine their models, the core insight remains. The first number we see can hijack our judgment, quietly but powerfully, shaping our sense of what is possible or reasonable. This scientific foundation not only explains why anchoring occurs, but also challenges us to recognize the limits of our own rationality and to approach numbers and first impressions with a healthy dose of skepticism. Imagine walking into a bustling gas station on a road trip. The price sign towers above the pumps, $4.79 per gallon. You sigh, fill up, and drive a few miles down the highway, only to see another station advertising $4.90. Suddenly, the second price seems like a bargain, even though on any other day you might have grumbled about paying over $4 for gas. This is anchoring in action. The first number you encountered clings stubbornly to your mind, coloring your judgment of everything that follows. It is a subtle but powerful force, and its grip on our everyday decisions runs deeper than most of us realize. Anchoring is not just a curiosity found in behavioral economics textbooks. It plays out in the real world, influencing choices that affect our wallets, our negotiations, and even the fate of individuals in courtrooms. Take the world of retail. When consumers walk into a store, they are constantly bombarded with numbers, original prices crossed out above sale tags, compare at signs, or tiered pricing that places a luxury item next to a basic model. Research shows these pricing strategies are anything but random. Experimental studies have found that unit price anchors can significantly affect both sales and revenue. When shoppers see a high anchor, such as an expensive bottle of olive oil displayed next to a moderately priced one, their willingness to pay for the more affordable option increases. The anchor does not just set expectations, it warps them, nudging people toward choices they might not otherwise make. But the reach of anchoring extends far beyond supermarket aisles. In negotiations, the initial offer serves as a powerful benchmark, shaping the entire bargaining process. Studies have consistently found a strong correlation between the first number put on the table and the final outcome. If a seller opens with a high asking price, say, for a used car, the buyer's counteroffer is likely to be higher than if the opening offer were low. The adjustment process rarely escapes the anchor's gravitational pull. This dynamic is not just theoretical, it plays out in real-world settings, from haggling over antiques to multi-million-dollar business deals. Interestingly, the so-called first-mover advantage is not absolute. While making the first offer often provides an anchoring benefit, research suggests there are situations where moving second can be advantageous. For example, if the initial anchor is seen as wildly unrealistic or outside the zone of possible agreement, it may backfire, causing the other party to disengage or counter more aggressively. The effectiveness of anchoring in negotiation, then, depends not only on who moves first, but also on the credibility and relevance of the anchor itself. In the legal world, anchoring can have consequences that are not just financial, but deeply impactful for real people's lives. A growing body of research, including meta-analyses and experimental studies, shows that numeric anchors can bias legal decisions. For instance, when jurors or judges are presented with a suggested sentence, a damages claim, or a prosecutor's recommendation, their judgments are pulled toward that initial figure, even when they know, on some level, that it is arbitrary or exaggerated. One analysis found that nearly 2/3 of judicial decisions in a particular study were swayed by anchoring, subtly influencing both the information judges focused on and the outcomes they reached. The effect is robust but not uniform. Factors such as legal expertise and the perceived relevance of the anchor can moderate its strength. The practical impact of anchoring in the courtroom is sobering. When a prosecutor asks for a harsh penalty, the number proposed can sway the final sentence, regardless of the facts of the case. Even experienced legal professionals are not immune. Anchoring infiltrates their reasoning, sometimes shifting outcomes in ways that are difficult to justify on the merits alone. Research indicates that the fairness of legal proceedings can be undermined by anchors, especially when they are introduced in high-stakes contexts like sentencing or awarding damages. While some moderators, such as the clarity of evidence or the judge's level of expertise, can buffer against the effect, research suggests that anchoring remains a stubborn presence in the legal system. Personal finance is another area where anchoring quietly erodes rational decision-making. Consider the choices people make when deciding how much to contribute to a retirement account. When an employer offers a 401k match of 6%, that number often becomes the default target for employees, even if it is far from optimal for their long-term goals. Similarly, when shopping for big-ticket items like appliances or electronics, consumers are often swayed by the first price they see, using it as a reference point for what seems reasonable. This can lead to overspending, undersaving, or accepting deals that are less favorable than they appear. Anchoring also plays a role in risk assessment and investment decisions. Investors may latch on to the initial price at which they bought a stock, using it as a mental benchmark for when to sell, even as market conditions change. If a share was purchased at $50 and now trades at $40, the original price acts as an anchor, making it emotionally difficult to sell at a loss. This tendency can lead to poor financial choices, such as holding on to declining investments in the hope they will return to the anchored value, rather than re-evaluating based on current circumstances. Experimental studies have explored the factors that make some people more susceptible to anchoring than others. For example, research has found that gender, emotion, and domain-specific knowledge can all influence how strongly a consumer's price judgment is affected by anchors. In consumer experiments, participants' willingness to pay for products was shaped by the first number presented, but the degree of influence varied depending on their familiarity with the product category, their emotional state, and even their gender. These findings suggest that anchoring is a nuanced phenomenon, with individual differences and situational factors modulating its impact. Businesses, aware of these dynamics, have refined their pricing strategies to take advantage of anchoring. High initial prices, tiered pricing models, and bundled deals are all designed to set favorable anchors in the minds of customers. A retailer might introduce a new high-end product at a premium price, knowing that even if few people buy it, its mere presence can make mid-range items seem more affordable and more appealing by comparison. The use of decoy products with inflated prices or features is another common tactic, anchoring expectations and subtly steering consumers toward the desired choice. The influence of anchoring is not limited to purchases or formal negotiations. It seeps into the way we judge wait times at restaurants, assess the value of promotions, or even set our own goals. For example, if you are told that the average wait for a table is 45 minutes, a table that becomes available after 30 feels like a win, even if half an hour would have seemed excessive without the anchor. Similarly, when setting goals, the first number proposed, whether for sales targets, fundraising, or personal milestones, frames what seems possible or desirable, shaping motivation and satisfaction. While it is tempting to believe that awareness of anchoring can shield us from its effects, the evidence suggests otherwise. Even those who know about the bias and who try to correct for it often fail to fully compensate. Anchoring operates beneath the surface, shaping our perception of fairness, value, and possibility. In financial matters, it can quietly sap our resources, leading us to spend more than we should, save less than we could, or invest unwisely. In negotiations and the law, it can tip the scales in favor of those who understand how to set the anchor, sometimes at the expense of equity and reason. Anchoring, then, is more than a quirk of the mind. It is a pervasive force, woven into the fabric of daily life. From gas pumps to courtrooms, from boardrooms to our own bank accounts, the first number we see exerts a silent, often invisible, influence. Recognizing its presence is only the first step. Truly resisting its pull may require new habits, new systems, or even changes to the environments in which we make our most important decisions. Yet the evidence is clear. Wherever numbers matter, anchoring is likely shaping the outcome, often in ways we never intended. If you have ever walked away from a purchase or negotiation wondering why your judgment felt strangely tethered, you have likely experienced the subtle pull of anchoring. Its grip is so gentle that even when we suspect it, the first number or piece of information we encounter can still shape our final decisions. The challenge, then, is not just to recognize anchoring, but to learn how to break free from its influence. Recent research offers both hope and practical guidance for anyone determined to reclaim independent judgment. Experiments on the anchoring effect have revealed a surprising fragility beneath its apparent strength. While anchors are powerful, their hold is not absolute. Under certain conditions, the effect can be weakened or even bypassed. In studies where participants were warned about the possibility of anchoring or given time to reflect, the bias did not always disappear, but it often loosened. This suggests that anchoring is not an unbreakable mental chain, but rather a flexible influence, one that can be stretched or even snapped with the right tools. One of the most effective tools is time. Evidence shows that the pace at which we make decisions directly affects how susceptible we are to anchoring. When we rush pressured by a ticking clock, a limited time offer, or a fast-talking salesperson, the initial number or suggestion we encounter embeds itself more deeply in our minds. In contrast, when we deliberately slow down and pause to reflect on the decision and consider alternatives, the anchor's influence begins to fade. This is not just about taking a deep breath, it is about intentionally creating space between the anchor and your final judgment. Even a few extra moments of consideration can help loosen the hold of that first figure. Self-confidence also plays a role. In consumer experiments, individuals who felt more confident in their knowledge or intuition were somewhat less likely to be swayed by an anchor. Though confidence alone does not guarantee immunity, early warning signs can make a difference as well. Forewarning people that they may be exposed to a bias primes them to spot it, and this simple act of anticipation can blunt the anchor's impact. For those who find themselves making repeated decisions in high anchoring environments, whether shopping, negotiating, or planning, it helps to develop a kind of mental checklist. Ask yourself, is this first number meaningful, or is it just a starting point designed to capture my attention? Actionable strategies for resisting anchoring have emerged from both laboratory research and real-world observation. One widely recommended approach is to seek out independent information before making a decision. If you are considering a purchase, do not accept the first price you see as gospel. Instead, research comparable products, average prices, or expert recommendations. The goal is to build your own reference points, anchors of your own choosing, grounded in evidence rather than marketing tactics. In negotiations, this means preparing your own estimates and alternatives in advance, so you are less likely to be pulled toward an opponent's opening offer. Another practical technique is to engage in what some researchers call zero-based thinking. This means approaching each decision as if you had no prior anchors at all. Imagine, for example, that you are budgeting for a new project. Instead of starting with last year's numbers or an arbitrary suggestion, you build your plan from scratch, considering only what you truly need and what the facts support. This strategy, borrowed from business budgeting practices, can be effective at neutralizing the effects of prior anchors, not only for money, but for time, effort, or any other quantity. Critical thinking is a powerful ally in this process. When you find yourself responding to an initial suggestion, pause and ask, what evidence supports this number? Is there a reason to trust it, or is it possible that it is arbitrary or even strategically chosen to guide my judgment? By stepping back and actively questioning the relevance and validity of the anchor, you engage your analytic faculties, shifting from a passive recipient of information to an active evaluator. This shift alone can help you make more accurate, independent decisions. Some experts advise limiting the use of language or cues that might introduce bias. In practical terms, this means focusing on facts and objective data rather than letting emotionally charged descriptions, comparisons, or numbers set the frame. If you are working in an environment where anchoring could affect others, such as marketing, law, or management, consider presenting information in ways that minimize the potential for bias. For instance, avoid highlighting extreme numbers and instead emphasize ranges, medians, or multiple perspectives. The reality, however, is that even experts are not immune to anchoring. Studies have shown that professionals in fields like law, finance, and medicine can be vulnerable, especially when under time pressure or stress. This recognition has led to the development of training programs and decision aids that help professionals identify and counteract potential anchors. Techniques such as structured decision-making, where each factor is considered independently before integrating information, have shown promise in reducing bias. For consumers, forewarned truly is forearmed. Simple habits, like checking multiple sources, setting personal criteria before shopping, and questioning the basis for discounts or comparisons, can make a measurable difference. Marketers are well aware of the anchoring effect and often design promotions to exploit it, so vigilance is key. When faced with a limited time offer or a dramatic price markdown, remember that these are often crafted to set an initial anchor and trigger an emotional response. By focusing on your own needs and independent research, you can resist the pressure to accept the anchor at face value. Time pressure is a particularly potent amplifier of anchoring. When decisions must be made quickly, the mind relies more heavily on the first information received, often at the expense of accuracy. Whenever possible, give yourself permission to slow down. Even a brief pause to gather more information or consult a checklist can improve judgment and lead to better outcomes. Early warnings and reminders can be built into decision processes. In workplaces, this might take the form of checklists or prompts that encourage employees to ask, is this initial figure justified, or are there other reference points I should consider? In personal life, simply reminding yourself before a big decision that anchoring might be at play can prime your mind to resist its influence. It is important to acknowledge that the science of anchoring is still evolving. While many strategies have shown promise in experiments, there is no panacea, no single trick that guarantees freedom from bias. The best results often come from layering multiple techniques, slowing down, seeking independent information, questioning initial numbers, and building confidence in your own evaluation. Over time, these habits can become second nature, helping you spot anchors and adjust accordingly. As you move forward, remember that anchoring is not a sign of weakness, but a feature of how the human mind works. Its influence can be managed, even if it cannot be entirely eliminated. By cultivating awareness, practicing critical thinking, and building new habits, you can reclaim your judgment from the pull of the first number and make decisions that truly reflect your own values and goals. The anchor may always be there, but with the right tools, you can choose when and whether to let it guide your course.